Hey, welcome back. I'm Graham, a novelist, illustrator, and truck driver in Oklahoma City. Because I'm a truck driver and an avid reader, I consume a lot of audiobooks, which is why I'm able to get my reading count so high in any given year. A couple of days ago, or maybe it was weeks at this point, who the heck knows, it all runs together when you're on the graveyard shift. I tweeted out that I was up to around 150 books read for this year, and I'll probably hit 170 by the time's all said and done. If you don't think audiobooks count as reading, I don't care. Save us the time in the comments. It counts. But I play this game every once in a while when I've hit a certain number where I tell people, it's like, hey, shoot out a random number and I'll tell you which book it was that I read this year and what I thought of it. My buddy Mike DM'd me and he said, like, hey, you don't have to say if you don't want to, but what's the worst book you've read this year? Now, as I've mentioned, I generally don't do negative reviews. Every once in a while, I'll weigh in on something if it's really relevant to do so. But he asked me, and I had the answer like that because I knew what it was. Just this terrible, awful dog crap book. Like, if I had been reading it in print instead of listening to it in my earbuds while I was hucking medical equipment off of the back of a trailer, I might have lit it on fire and thrown it across my yard. It was that bad. Hopefully you're wondering now at this point, like, oh, holy crap, Graham, like, how could it have been so bad? Let me count the ways. He goes, you should do a review of it. And I said, I don't do that kind of thing. He goes, well, what if you compared it to one that was good? Okay, you got a deal, Mike. So I put out some feelers. I said, this terrible book that I read was a haunted house book. If you guys can recommend a really good haunted house book so that I can read that and do a compare and contrast, I'm all in. A couple of recommendations were made, and I settled on one by an author named Elizabeth Hand, who apparently has been in the game for a while. I feel like I've heard of one or two of her titles, but I'd never read anything by her before. She's got an interesting pedigree as far as like just her own life journey and the things that she's written. She's done a lot of short stories. She's done a lot of gothic horror. She's got a very particular skill set. And if this one book of hers that I read is indicative of her general writing style, I think I'll want to read more of hers because her prose is really good. Her concepts are strong. The way that she paints a picture with words, it all goes extremely well. The book that I hated, just get it out of the way right now, is called 12 Nights at Rotterhouse by J.W. Oker. I picked this one because I'd read a book by him before, maybe 4 years ago, called A Season with the Witch. If I'm remembering the title correctly, I'm of course going to put it right here after I find the image after this video. This was a nonfiction travelogue. J.W. Oker apparently specializes in that kind of thing. He goes to different places, stays there for a while, and then just writes about his experience and then tidies it up, does some edits. In this book, he went to Salem, Massachusetts, and went there with an especial focus on what is there to celebrate other than the Salem witch trials. And there are a couple of historical societies and facilities there that really want to emphasize all of the other sides of Salem, Massachusetts. They're known for the Salem witch trials, which he said didn't make a whole lot of sense because those weren't the only witch trials of the time period and not even the most devastating, but for some reason that's the one that got the rap. Maybe late 20th century we can credit Arthur Miller, the communist playwright, with that because he wrote The Crucible. But anyway, it was an interesting enough book. It was a good atmospheric read for October. And while I only gave it 3 stars because books of that kind can only be so exciting, even if they contain a lot of factual information, I thought, I'll check back and look at something of his. Well, then I found out this year that he wrote a novel a while back, this 12 Nights at Rotterhouse. And let me just put it this way. It would be like if Graham Bradley wrote a book about a very rugged, bearded trucker who shaves his head and works the graveyard shift and then comes home and tries to be a successful indie author illustrator, but it's not working really well. And he's got one last chance to write a really good illustrated indie novel before his wife makes him just hunker down and get a real job so that they can have kids. Like, imagine that, but now you're a travel writer who has been broke for so many years and your wife wants to have a whole bunch of kids and you need to get serious about your writing income or else find a job that can get you some real money because writing doesn't really pay the bills unless you're the cream of the cream, creme de la creme, whatever. I don't speak French. It's my privilege as an American. Blah, blah, blah. J.W. Oker writes about a travelogue writer who is trying this gimmicky thing where he stays in haunted houses or haunted sites, disconnects from the real world digitally, and then writes about his experience when it's all over, thinking that the gimmick will be enough to sell the book. This is the 4th or 5th time that he's done this as this book sets off. And he thinks that this is going to be the one because it's also his last shot. His wife is telling him, like, hey, we've done this long enough. You need to make some real money. He's hinting at the beginning of the book that he and his wife are kind of having a fight, and he and his best friend are especially having a fight, and it's been going on for about a year. The tension is constantly referred to, but there are no real clues given as to, what the nature of the conflict is. It's not the good kind of foreshadowing or teasing or anything like that because A, it's not subtle, and B, it's too repetitive. It happens so many times throughout the book that you would think that at some point he would explain just a little bit more why he's fighting with his best friend and why he's feeling so tense toward his wife, that when the revelation does come, it's equal parts annoying and kind of a letdown because the surprise is not that great, but the overplaying of it just makes it that much worse. And that's only one element of what went wrong. If my vagueness annoys you, that's the annoyance that I had reading this book and trying to figure out what the heck this guy was so grumpy about. So the main character, Felix, he goes and finds this haunted house on the National Register of Historic Places. Some lady bought it. He says, hey, it'll drum up tourism interest if you let me go do this thing where I live in the house for 12 days and do the thing. And she's like, yeah, okay. And he's kind of desperate to make it work. He goes and stays there just as he gets into this haunted rundown house, this mansion that was built however many hundreds of years ago, and so on and so forth. Like, his phone dies. Shortly after his phone dies, the best friend with whom he's having a beef, his name is Thomas, he shows up. And he spends the next couple hundred pages of the book dancing around whatever the beef is, mentioning the beef but not saying at all what it is. And then they just kind of explore the house, and you're talking a lot about the house, and you're tearing paint off the walls in the house, and you're going into the basement of the house. And when they are having conversations and trying to not talk about the big bad thing that they're not talking about, they end up just giving each other horror movie trivia the entire time. And at this point, it becomes a kind of book that I really don't like. This was one of the things that I really got annoyed by when I read Ready Player One, because it was just like half the dialogue in that book was just characters talking about, oh, remember this thing from the 80s? Yeah, I like it. And then they give us 2 or 3 straight pages about what the thing from the 80s was. And it doesn't really do anything to advance the story. It's a narrative dead end. It's just the author talking about a thing that he likes and doing so while he has you hostage in the middle of a story. Same thing with these characters here. Things do boil up and come to a head between Felix and Thomas, and finally, when the revelation does come, it's that Felix has a massive drinking problem, and he drinks himself blackout drunk. A year ago, when Felix and Thomas and their wives were hanging out together at Thomas's place, or maybe it was Felix's place, don't know, can't remember, don't care, too mad. Felix got so stupidly drunk, and so did the others, that while he passed out on the living room floor, the others went upstairs and had we'll say the French word for housework for 3. All right, you get me? In case there are kids in the room. They did the dance, all right? And Felix wakes up the next day, and the friend energy is really weird, and he can tell that something went on, but Thomas swears that nothing happened and that he was also too drunk to remember if anything happened, but that he's pretty sure he didn't diddle Felix's wife along with doing the rest of all that. So, trying to stay as YouTube friendly as I can here, but you get what I'm saying. That's what's hanging in the air between the friends, and I thought, okay, that's a little bit more serious than just, let's alleviate the tension here by talking about horror movies. Ugh. Well, in the meantime, there are very, very slight hints that there might actually be a haunting in this house, in this Rotter mansion that he's living in, but it doesn't really go anywhere compared to how often he either talks about the tension of the secret thing or horror movie trivia. Like, it takes a back seat when it really should be more of a prevalent feature in a book like this. Finally, he gets drunk, there's some weird psychic attack by a ghost, and Felix freaks out and has this is the moment where I stopped the book like 90% of the way in it, and I didn't finish it, I don't even want to know. Like, he gets this bonkers idea that he can reestablish the equilibrium in his friendship with Thomas if he and Thomas get drunk and if he makes a prison burrito for Thomas, all right? That's as much as I'm going to say on the subject. Frick, like what the hell? What? No, like this is not good fiction. This is not compelling, character revelations or development or anything. Holy crap, this guy's got some things to work out, and I'm not talking about Felix, all right? Ended the book right there. Done. Like, I could scream into the void about how freaking terrible of a read that is, but I think you get it at this point. Scratched it off, wrote it down on my list, done, returned it to the library, done. Done! Frick, I hated that book. So, when Mike reached out to me and asked what the worst book that I read was this year, like I said, I knew right off the top of my head because I would be very, very hard pressed to read anything worse than this year. Like, not only did it not live up to its concept, to its pitch, to its jacket flap description, it set all of that aside so this guy could have a beef with his friend and then dream about doing that to him to make everything all right. Okay? Like, just stop. Holy crap. Now we get to the better side of the coin, the flip side of the coin, a different haunted house story with a much better setting, a much better hook, and extremely, I can't stress this enough, much better execution. The book is called Wilding Hall. Wilding Hall is the name of a mansion in an English village somewhere. The story, it's set recently, but it's like doing a true crime podcast where a whole bunch of people who were involved in this incident get interviewed and give their varying recollections of this thing that happened in the early to mid 70s in England. When the folk rock scene was at its peak. From what I understand about Elizabeth Hand, she lived through this, and so she's got firsthand experience and memories of what the whole area was like and what the scene was, and she's able to add those details of authenticity to it because she was there. Again, I listened to the audiobook version of this, which was great because it was a full cast narration. Every person that was interviewed, as it were, they cast a different actor to play them, and it went great. So there's this fictional band called Wind Hollow Fair. They cut one album, it went great, with a small label in England, and they're getting ready to do their second one, but it's not quite coming together well, so they go and stay for the summer at this Wilding Hall place. The manager got it set up for them, and they just have themselves a classic 70s rockin' good time. They stay up all night, sleep all day, drugs, sex, rock and roll, booze, the whole nine. They're sleeping with each other at different phases of it. I liked the delicate hand that Elizabeth Hand used in describing all that stuff. Like, she didn't get into excessive detail. You knew what was going on. She didn't have to put you in the room marking it all down with excessive verbiage about it. Like, okay, these two are sleeping together, these two are sleeping together, fine. It works. She didn't overly focus on that. Same thing with the drugs and the booze scene. It was there to the extent that it was necessary to set the table, and then she moves on with the actual meat and potatoes of the story. It becomes really, really interesting when the lead singer of the band, who, as the true crime podcast element of this all starts to unravel, you realize that this dude went missing a long time ago, and his disappearance is kind of an unsolved mystery. And then the focus becomes, the other members of the band who were there and knew what he was doing right up to the moment that he disappeared. And they still, to this day, kind of hope that maybe he'll eventually come back. There was a concert that they played at a local tavern, and then there was an open air recording that they did of their album in the woods outside of Wilding Hall. Julian was very interested in the mysticism of folk songs and local legends. Keep in mind this takes place in England. They've got druidic pixie fairy stuff there going back 2,000 years. He starts walking through the woods where the locals tell him not to. Don't go around this well. Don't go around this stone structure. He does it anyway. It's very atmospheric, and it takes its time setting the table and putting all the pieces in line, and at the same time, it doesn't wait for you to get to the end to figure out what the heck's going on. It keeps you guessing, and it gets you actively engaged in trying to figure out what might have happened to him. They play this concert at the tavern, and then they all go back to Wilding Hall for the night. The interesting thing is that they were late starting their set at the tavern because Julian was waiting for some girl to show up, and when she did show up, nobody knew who she was. Nobody had ever seen her before, but apparently he had met her while he was out in the woods. She goes back to them with to the mansion, to Wilding Hall. She doesn't say a word to anybody else all night. They go into Julian's room. The next day, while everybody's waking up at 4 in the afternoon or whatever, they realize that Julian and the girl never came out, and slowly it starts to click with them that he's not here. He's not in the house. They go into the room. He's gone. The girl's gone. From there, they wait a certain amount of time before they contact the manager. They contact the police, and they're not sure what to make of it. And the summer ends. The years go by. Nobody knows what happened to Julian Blake. I'm going to stop describing what happens in this story from there. Wilding Hall was at the center of it. The folklore, the rock, all that stuff was at the center of it. This is a short read. In print, it's like 150 pages. The audio is like 4.5 hours, and it was perfectly executed. I'm going to grab a print copy of this from my own library. The hardcover is really expensive, so for it being as short as it is, but it's a beautiful piece of writing, and it's one of those that as soon as it was done, I was like, I know I'm going to read this every couple of years. It was very, very good. It was, like Rotterhouse, a haunted house story. It dealt with characters that are living on the hard edge of life, and it doesn't dance around hang on. Crap, sorry. It's Saturday in Oklahoma, so they're testing the tornado sirens. Hang on. Anyway, both of these books are about characters who live on the hard edge of life, we'll say. And there's substance abuse, there's promiscuity, there's all that stuff. It's not that it's a sense of prudishness, as it were, that made Rotter suck compared to Wilding Hall. It was how these two different authors approached not only this setting and this concept, but the content therein and the execution therewith. Elizabeth Hand did a much better job with all of those same pieces compared to J.W. Oker, and managed to not just grossly offend me in the process. And it's not like I'm the most delicate guy in the world, all right? Like, if you've seen some of the stuff that I've had to read on the inside walls of construction yard outhouses, you'd know that. All right, the point is, crafting good art with words, there's got to be certain standards of execution on that for an author to live up to. And not only when you come short of that, but like directly run at it and do it wrong, man, that pisses me off. So 12 Nights at Rotterhouse, terrible book. Probably never going to read anything by J.W. Oker again. But Wilding Hall by Elizabeth Hand, which came out like 4 or 5 years ago, excellent book. I won't say that it made my best of year list. I felt like when it finished up, I was almost going to give it like a hearty best of year consideration, but I was like, I don't feel like it was completely there, but dang, it was close, like a solid runner-up. By the way, check in on New Year's Eve for my best of year list. That's usually when I let that one go live. So, hearty recommendation on the one hand and a recommendation of avoidance on the other. Thanks to Mike for challenging me to do this. It was interesting and it was fun. If you guys want to check the description below, you can find a link to my own books on Amazon as well as to other review sites that I write for. In the meantime, drive safe. See you out there.